Great, so we've reached the point where we're able to access the email address and height that the user is entering in our form. And so we were able to print those two values in the console. Now, instead of printing them, we will just go ahead and send them to the database. So our database currently has no values, and you can perform SQL query to prove that. So you go to SQL and select all from data. So that's the name of the table, and you should be on your current database to be able to get the values for that table. So execute query, and you see that we have these 3 fields there, but we don't have any rows. So let's go ahead and add them. Now, to be able to add rows with SQL Alchemy, you should point to the SQL Alchemy object, so which is DB in our case. And basically, what you do is you point to DB, and then to the session class, and then to the add method. And now this add method now expects the values that you want to pass. And this is a bit tricky. It's not values exactly, it's something else, but let's try the values first. So we have email and height, which are 2 plain strings, so Python strings, and they are currently being printed out in here. And you also need to perform another action there, and that's a commit method that commits the session. So it commits the changes to the database. So it's quite a few lines of code. And this is not all we need something else there, but let's see what happens with these two so that we understand how the process is going. So I'll press submit here, and what that will do, it will go to this URL as defined in the index.html page, in this action button. So success decorator there, that will execute this function, and this function will try now to send this data to the database. Submit, and yeah, we have an error there. By the way, note that if you have the debug equal to false, you wouldn't get these debug notifications. And that means when you deploy your application online, you want to set this to false, because you don't want the user to see these errors, and that may cause insecurity in your application. So let's see what this says. So SQL Alchemy is saying that class built-in string is not mapped, which suggests that we need to map these strings to something. And that something is a database model, which we are inheriting from this class. So basically what we need to do here is create an object instance of our data class, and there what we need to pass are these 2 parameters. So that would be email and height. So we are sending the values that the user is inputting here. You are sending these values to these 2 parameters. And what the data class will do with these 2 is it will create a database model object, which is recognized now by the add method of the SQL Alchemy object. So we just pass here the data object that we created here. So data. And don't confuse this data with this name. This is the table name, this is our variable. They don't have to be the same. Good. I save the script now, and the application restarted. So I'll go ahead now and try this again. Submit. And it seems to be working. So we got the message there. But let's check the database. So I'll execute this query again. Yeah. Here is our first record. Great. And we have the ID here, which by the way is 4. It's not 1 because before I recorded this video I was making some tests, and so I sent some data here via Python, and then I deleted those data, so now I'm sending again new records there, and that starts from where I left it last time. So and here is the height and the email address. So what's left now is we were able to send this data to the database, but now we have to send this height that the user entered there, we have to send it to the user's email address, which is the one that is being received together with the height. And we also need to calculate an average out of our table, so the average of the height column, which means every time the user sends some data, we calculate a new average of the data we have so far and send that average to the user via email. However, before we do that, let's make sure our application is running smoothly. Yeah, we know that's working correctly almost, but what if I send the same email address to the database? What happens? Oh yeah, we get an error. So it says psycopg2 duplicate key values violates unique constraints data email, and that happens because here when we created this table field there, we set this parameter to true, so we only accept unique values for the email address, and we don't want to have duplicate emails. That wouldn't make much sense too, but we also don't want this error to be displayed and to break the user page when the user is pressing submit button for the second time. So there may be various ways to handle this, but what I'm thinking of doing here is, let me look at the error again. So this is trying to insert data into the table, into these two fields. That means the script stops somewhere at this point where we add data. So we are being able to get the email address and the height successfully from the HTTP request, but then we're not putting them in the database. So what we need to do is we need to check this data, this pair of values against the table rows that we have in the database. That means we need to apply some sort of conditional to these rows. So if that conditional is not satisfied, then we don't execute this. So that means we need to do some if there, and then everything goes underneath. So that would be something like, query the database, query the database table, and send this data, actually the email address, send it to the database table, and check if there is something like that email in the email column of the table data. So to do a query, we would go like db, so we point to the db object, and then to the session, and then to the query method. And what we need to pass to the query is always the name of the class, so the blueprint that holds the database model. And then we filter that, so we don't want to query everything. We want to, from data, we want the email field, which actually is a class variable, so we are accessing this here. So that field where the row of that field is equal to the email variable. So the email variable is this one here. I saved the script, so we currently have a syntax error there because I haven't finished the query yet. We need some column there. So again, we are querying this database model here and then filtering that query where the value of this email column, so this one here, is equal to the value of the email variable, which should be the current email address of the current HTTP request. So that's good. We also need to add something else here, but before I do that, I'd like to show you what this expression produces so that you understand things better. So let me temporarily unindent them, the lines, and I'll print this and see what we get out of that. So I'll save that and rerun the script. Good, we don't have any syntax error. Reload this and enter the same email address again. And we got the same error there, because we still haven't applied that conditional. And here we got a long traceback, so let me look. Let me find the first print statement there. Yep, so this print statement here, so the email and the height are being printed out in this line, so a@a.com and the height. And then under that we should have that kind of object, which actually is an SQL query. So this is making a query to the database to search for that existing email. And now we can simplify this by adding here a count method. So that is getting a bit complicated, but bear with me there. So let me try this again. Submit. We still get the same error. And let me find the print there, the output of the print functions. And yeah, now we see that we have 1 there as a result of this print statement, which means that the query found 1 existing email address, 1 existing row with that email address in the database table, which actually would be a simple integer. So let me try that. Check the type of that object. So it's a class integer, so it's a plain Python integer, and we can now make use of that and apply a conditional there. So we have this scenario when we get 1, but we also have the other scenario. Let me remove the type there and the bracket here. Save the script. So we have another scenario when we get 0, so for an email address that doesn't exist in the database. So as you see, that is a 0 just down here. That means we can apply conditional just here. We could say something like, if this thing is equals to 0, then store those data to the database, and also return the success.html template. If that is not true, then we want to return the render template method. So we want to render again, what do we want to render? Well, we want to render index.html. So yeah, let's try that. Reload the page, and let me first enter something that I haven't yet entered in the database. So a.com and 1, 2, 3. That was successful. Now let's try something that we had entered before. That was, I believe, this one. Or let me check in the database. I forgot what we used to enter. Yeah, a@a.com. Submit that. That was successful. I think I entered a new email address there, a@a.a. Yeah, I should have entered a@a.com. Sorry about that. At a.com. Yeah, this is an existing email address. Yeah, let's see now. Good. So what happens is that Python rendered for us the index.html page again, even though this looks like we tried to access the success web page. So again, a.a.com 1, submit. Sorry, this should be higher than 50. Yeah, seems to be working almost perfect. except of it's not a great user experience. So if you enter an email address there and then you get the same page loading again, you think that application is broken. So you want to notify the user somehow that he is entering the same email address. So we could do that by adding here, when the user enters the same email address, we could add above here a message in some red color or something. And to do that, you'd want to first pass a string there to your index.html template. Let's say seems like we've got something from that mail address already, and I'd like to put that down here so that you can see things. And you know that if you break a line in a comma and after a comma, that things still work. So Python reads this as one line. Yeah, good. So we will send that text to this index.html template, but we also need to say here where do we want to insert the text. So we said we want to insert it just above the form, so above here. And what we could do, maybe add a division there and say class message. So we want to select that class later from the CSS file, and then we need to close the div there. And here comes the placeholders. So we want to pass text in the save method. Good, so that should do it. Yeah, let's see. Make sure you reload this with Ctrl R so you empty the cache. Yeah, let me try to add that email address again. Yeah, now we're getting some text here that lets the user know what they're doing. So that's great, and so we can tweak that text, so the style of that, by going to our CSS file, static main.css, and we could point to that class, so message. Maybe make it bigger, so font size 15 pixels. And yeah, maybe a color of this kind. I found this color code earlier on the web, so that should work now. Go here and reload the page. Yeah, so that seems to be working. Let me try that again. Or you could make the font family the same as this. So make sure again you reload with Ctrl R and 1 to 3. Yeah, so that seems to be working well. Obviously I have zoomed it out, so let me zoom at 100%. Yeah, this is the actual size of the web app, and I believe we come up with a good application. And in the next lecture, what we'll be implementing is send the user the actual results, so the average of this data that we are collecting. We'll implement that using SMTP-lib, so the library that sends email addresses from an email address that we will give to the script to the email address that the user enters in the form. And yeah, we'll do that in the next lecture. Yeah, talk to you there.